Good morning. It is such an honor and a privilege to be here at the 16th International Literature Festival of Berlin. And I have to thank you so much for coming out this morning. An author has nothing without readers, and I'm so happy to see you, all of you. I'm particularly thrilled to be taking part in the children's and young adult program this year, because in the United States, I'm considered a crossover author. Crossover because my books are read across readership of many ages, from students all the way up to elderly adults. That's why I'm considered a crossover author. And I have written 3 historical novels. And as Philip said, much to my delight, my books are published in over 50 countries and 35 languages. And that certainly would not be possible without my publishers and my translators. And the interesting thing is that in Germany, I am not an adult author. I am a young adult author. In some countries, they feel that my books are too terrifying and too tragic and too dark to give to young readers. But here in Germany, I am published for young readers, and I'm so grateful to my publisher, Königskinder Carlsen Verlag, and also my brilliant translator, Henning Arns, who's translated all 3 of my novels. Can we give a round of applause for that? Thank you. And as a writer, I am drawn to underrepresented stories and what I call history in hiding. I spend a lot of time pondering the question, why do some parts of history become part of our collective consciousness, while other parts of history remain hidden? And that question inspired my first novel, Between Shades of Grey, which shares the story of Lithuanians, Latvians, and Estonians who were deported to Siberia by Joseph Stalin. And my interest in history also inspired my most recent novel that I'm here for, Salt to the Sea, which tells the story of the evacuation of East Prussia and the sinking of the German ship Wilhelm Gustloff. And in addition to generating questions, writing historical novels and researching the past has taught me many things, but perhaps most importantly, it has taught me that progress is possible. And a bit later, I'll explain what I mean by that. I'm the daughter of a Lithuanian father and a German-American mother. My mother's family, my maternal grandfather, is from the Mecklenburg region of Germany. And my father was born in Lithuania. And in 1940, he fled. And he traveled through Poland and Austria. And he finally made it to Germany. And Germany allowed my father and his family into refugee camps here. And my father spent 9 years in refugee camps, 8 of those years in Germany, before being allowed to enter the United States. And so in the United States, growing up with a name like Ruta Sepetys, this is my name in Lithuanian, was pretty difficult. Americans pronounced my name Ruta Sepetys. And People were challenged by my name, and some people were even suspicious. They would sometimes ask, so what are you? Like I was an alien or something. Some people, when they would email me, they would say, so I have to ask, is a Ruta Sepetys a man or a woman? They'd say, is Ruta Sepetys your real name? Like I would make it up. I mean, seriously, if I'm going to make up a name, I would make up something easier than Ruta Sepetys. And so this was constantly something I was asked, and I would answer, I'm Lithuanian, I'm Lithuanian. And as a young girl, it heightened my sensitivity to ethnicity. And as a result, I think my Lithuanian heritage plays a large role in my identity. And now as an author, I've been traveling the world and meeting with readers and discussing interpretations of history. And I quickly learned that the exact same text and the exact same story has a really different meaning for each reader depending on the culture or ethnic lens that you're looking through. And of course, there were many lenses at the end of World War II. And so that's what I wanted to focus on my new book. And Estimates of displaced persons following World War II, they ranged from 7 to 15 million. And as the daughter of a refugee, the narrative of displaced people has always really resonated with me, particularly the stories of the children. What would it be like if you were a young child to leave everything you've ever known and loved behind? How frightening for the children, innocent victims of combat and vengeful regimes. These kids, they were orphaned by war and atrocity and left with a heartache and an inheritance of responsibility for something that they had no role in causing. And it was the plight of those kids after World War II, the children, that really inspired me to write my new book, Salt to the Sea. And most of you are probably familiar with the history behind the novel because you're German. Perhaps some of you or your family members even lived through it. Salt to the Sea tells the story of the perilous evacuation through East Prussia and the enormous sea disaster, the sinking of the Wilhelm Gustloff. All of you have heard of the Titanic, the leisure cruise ship that so tragically sank and over 1,500 people perished. The Titanic sank in 3 hours, but neither the Titanic nor the Lusitania claims the title of the single largest maritime disaster in history. That title belongs to the Wilhelm Gustloff, and the death toll of the Wilhelm Gustloff dwarfs the Titanic and the Lusitania combined. And that was sort of my point into the story. In January of 1945, World War II was drawing to a close, and the Red Army was pushing in and advancing into East Prussia. And Hitler forbid German civilians to evacuate. And when it became clear to everyone that evacuation was the only option, for most people, it was already too late. And so they scrambled and they put together a naval evacuation, and they called it Operation Hannibal. And one of the ships that was used for this evacuation was a former KDF cruise ship, the Wilhelm Gustloff. And capacity of the Wilhelm Gustloff was about 1,400. And they had all these people they wanted to put on the ship, so they took all of the furniture off the ship. They drained the swimming pool on the ship, and they loaded more passengers and more passengers. Again, capacity was about 1,400. When the Wilhelm Gustloff sailed on January 30th, 1945, some estimate that it was carrying over 10,000 people. And just after 9 p.m., amidst a snowstorm on the Baltic Sea, the ship was torpedoed by a Soviet submarine. 3 torpedoes, 60 minutes to sink. And it's reported that over 9,300 people lost their lives, including 5,000 children and teenagers. It's the single largest maritime disaster in history, but most people have never heard of it. And so I spent years researching and writing the novel. I traveled to 6 different countries tracking down stories, and I consulted historians, academics, journalists, deep sea divers, survivors, and families of survivors and victims. And I'm so grateful for the people who have provided assistance in my research, some of whom are here today. So grateful. I couldn't have done it without them. But during my research, I learned that although the Wilhelm Gustloff was a German ship, there were Lithuanians, Latvians, Estonians, Croatians on board. There were even reports of some Dutch stowaways. And when I spoke to people about the evacuation and the sinking, their accounts differed relative to their own personal experience. And of course, that's natural and understandable. But in writing the book, I wanted to reflect these different viewpoints and lenses in the novel to show that even if an event is shared, every human being's interpretation is unique. And so I created 4 characters, 4 young people, and they're all hunted and haunted by tragedy and lies and war. We have a Lithuanian nurse and an East Prussian artist and a Polish orphan, and a young German sailor. And so Salt to the Sea is told in the alternating voices of these 4 young people. And their fates converge as they run for their lives, and they arrive at the port, and they all board this doomed ship. And when I began work on the novel years ago, I had no way of knowing that when it was published, that we would be amidst a refugee crisis. And as the daughter of a refugee, people often ask me for my thoughts, but like many people, I'm frustrated. I have more questions than I do answers. But again, my thoughts always return to the kids and to the young people. And I see these reports and I think, who is that small child running for his life? And in the United States, we see more of the broadcasters in the media than we see of the refugees themselves. And some Americans aren't even familiar with the term displaced person. But when I see these images of the children, I ask, who is that child running for his life? Who is that child who has lost family and freedom and country and home? Because 67 years ago, that child, that refugee, was my father. And last year, Pope Francis addressed the refugee crisis in his speech to US Congress, and he stated, we need to see their faces, and we need to hear their stories. But how can we see their faces? Through books and reading, stories and characters. They come alive. We see their faces, and we share their pain. For 300 pages, we walk beside these people. We feel their fear, and it doesn't matter if it's 1945 or if it's present day. Suddenly, through story, a statistic becomes a human being. And although some adults are familiar with the history behind the story and the population displacement during World War II, I wanted to share this history and this story with an important group of readers. You guys, the young readers. Young readers, you have a tremendous sense of justice. Young readers ask really difficult questions and sincere questions, and you demand honest answers. You deserve them. And young readers point out the flaws, the iniquities. They quickly see through facade. And young readers have a profound sense of emotional truth. If a young person tells you that they're in love or that they're angry, believe them. I promise you they are. Young people understand and experience the force of love intensely. At a recent book event, there was a teenager who was talking about love, and she shared this quote with me. She said, "Love is giving someone the power to destroy you, but trusting them not to." Truth and justice, love and trust. The young generation, you guys, you are the ones to preserve and carry our fading stories into the future. So, young readers in Germany and attendees here within the young adult program of the ILB, I am so honored to write for you, and I am so honored to work with you. You are the future eyes of the past. You're the generation who really does see the true faces. You are the ones who might wonder, what if that kid that we are trying to deny has the exact qualities that we need to make the world a safer place? You're asking the right questions, and we need you in this conversation. You are the ones who may benefit from our good decisions, but you are the ones who will definitely suffer from our bad decisions. And that's what's great about history. History allows us to examine decisions. Yes, okay, history is full of sadness and suffering and loss and pain, but it also shines light on hope and freedom and courage and the miraculous nature of the human spirit. And in that regard, all of the attendees at ILB this week, the next 2 weeks, young and old, they play a role in this. You guys are not just readers, you are lamplighters of compassion and courage and change. And by sharing stories and discussing difficult history together, you are extending one of the most powerful gifts that you all have as human beings, and that's empathy. Empathy to tell another human being, I know your story, and I feel for you, and the world has not forgotten you, and we must do better. And why is that important? Well, I feel that when story and suffering are acknowledged, perhaps we can take one small step toward protecting and restoring human dignity. And when I began this speech, I mentioned that through writing historical fiction and studying history, I've learned that progress is possible. What did I mean by that? Well, my books have been used in the United States for what's called all-city reading programs. And for those programs, the mayor of a city chooses one book, and the middle schools, the high schools, the universities, the adult reading groups, and the elderly reading groups, they all read the same book. And after a few months, everyone gathers in a community auditorium, just like this one. And I mentioned that my first novel, Between Shades of Gray, tells the story of Stalin's mass deportations of the Baltic people to Siberia. Well, that book has been used for several all-city reading programs. And when we gathered in the auditorium for the community event, 12-year-old readers were discussing the history with people in their 80s, people who had actually experienced the war. And more importantly, readers who had stood on opposing sides during the war had read the book, and they were discussing it together. I sat on stage and I watched as readers from the United States, Germany, Russia, Japan, Israel, Lithuania, and many countries discussed this. And they shared insight and responsibility and the common desire to protect and respect the dignity of mankind. And it occurred to me at that moment, I said, wow, history divided us, but through reading, we can be united in story and study and remembrance, and that is the power of books, and that is a power that we celebrate during ILB. And we also celebrate and encourage thoughtful exchange. You guys, when a writer writes a book and publishes it and puts it out into the world, it belongs to you. It belongs to the readers. And whether you love a book or you hate a book, you're right. That experience belongs to you. And your interpretation is more important than the author's explanation. I promise you. And so I ask you, during ILB, share and discuss the lens that you look through. Because the books here in Berlin over the next couple weeks, they're important, but not necessarily because of the authors who wrote them. They're important because they represent countless souls, characters, who struggled, lived, suffered, loved, and maybe felt like the world had forgotten them. And I'm here in Berlin for my novel, Salt to the Sea. I wrote the book. It's not my story. History wrote this story, and it belongs to the true witnesses. But when they're gone, it'll be up to the readers to help those stories endure. As I said, some estimate that there were over 10,000 passengers on the Gustloff when it sank, including 5,000 innocent children. And the Gustloff was not the only ship that sank. There were others. There was the Goya, the Steuben, the Thielbach, Kep Arkona, and others. Nearly 30,000 people suffered horrific deaths at sea. Each one had a story. And we know the villains' names because we teach the villains' names. But we don't always know the victims' names. What could we learn from their stories? So thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak with you, to discuss difficult past and difficult present, to recognize those who have struggled and those who are struggling. And please remember, it's really challenging right now, but progress is possible. So let's learn and grow and create hope for a more just future together. Thank you.